The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The Burrow burned on a Thursday, not from Death Eaters. The war was 3 days over. Voldemort had been reduced to something that was no longer a body, and the Death Eaters were either imprisoned or performing their exonerations with the practiced speed of people who had been rehearsing the performance for years. The fire at the Burrow was accidental. A gas fitting in the kitchen wall, an oil lamp knocked over in the chaos of a household that had been running on crisis and had not yet learned how to stop. Arthur and Molly were at St. Mungo's with the twins and the infant Ginny, who was barely 3 months old and whom Molly had not left behind when the neighborhood's relief celebration turned reckless. Charlie was 8, Percy was 5. Ron was not yet 2. The 3 boys were asleep when the kitchen wall gave. By the time the fire reached the upper floor, Percy and Charlie were gone. Ron was pulled from the rubble of the outer wall, which had fallen outward rather than in, his left eyebrow singed clean off, entirely uninjured in any way that could be medically explained. A passing muggle found him in the debris before the Ministry's obliviators could clean the scene, which was either luck or the first evidence that this child had a specific relationship with the kind of catastrophe that should have finished him. Arthur and Molly were found and told within the hour. Molly lasted 4 days. Not from physical injury, she had none, but from the specific kind of grief that produces its own internal catastrophe. She had left 2 of her children sleeping in a house and returned to a ruin. Her magical signature collapsed on itself the way cores can when the will behind them stops finding a reason to cohere. The healers had seen it before in the war's worst weeks. They had not expected to see it again so soon after the ending. Arthur lasted 9 days more. His curse exposure from the neighborhood jinx, initially assessed as minor, progressed in the way of things that are wrong underneath the surface before they are wrong on top of it. He did not complain, which was characteristic, and which meant the healers were too late when they finally looked deeper. By the time it was finished, Bill Weasley was 11 years old, and in his first term at Hogwarts, and had a sister and 2 brothers distributed among 3 different family contacts. And the specific grief of a child who has been away from home for the first time when home ceases to exist. He was too young to take anyone in. He was old enough to understand that. The grief of understanding that would live in him for a long time. The twins went to Aunt Muriel and Devon, who received them with the tight-lipped practicality of a woman who finds sentiment inconvenient and duty inescapable. Ginny went with them, too young to know what she had lost, which was, Muriel reasoned, a mercy of sorts. It was not a warm house, but it was a house, and there was food, and by the following spring you could hear the twins laughing in the garden again, which was the most reliable measure of children returning to themselves that Muriel had ever encountered. Albus Dumbledore was at Privet Drive before any of it concluded. He had been there for 2 days, 2 days longer than he had planned, because of the scar. Harry James Potter was sleeping in a borrowed crib in Petunia Dursley's second bedroom, which Petunia had cleared of its stored boxes, with the specific resentment of a woman managing the unmanageable by imposing physical order on the parts she could control. The boy looked like James, which Dumbledore found difficult. He looked like Lily around the eyes, which Dumbledore found harder. The scar was wrong. The lightning bolt itself, pale pink, already fading at the edges, was exactly what the rebounded killing curse should have left. What was wrong was the magical signature underneath it. A killing curse, deflected by sacrificial love magic, should have left a mark and moved on. This had left something else, a resonance, faint and unstable, a secondary frequency that Dumbledore recognized from a pre-ministry text on soul anchoring as the specific signature of a soul in proximity to a fragment of another. Voldemort was not gone, not entirely. Something had remained, anchored to the boy's scar, and the question of what to do about it was the question Dumbledore had been sitting with for 48 hours when the news from the Burrow reached him. He thought about it for a long time. Then he performed a soul tether. It was drawn from the same pre-ministry source, a text on magical bonding that addressed the specific problem of an unstable soul fragment and whether a second magical signature, closely bound to the first, might function as a stabilizing anchor. The fragment, seeking to extend its influence through the scar's connection, would be confused by the presence of a second magical core woven into the same field. It would have no clear path of singular access. It would be diluted. It would quieten. The theory was sound. The ethics were the problem, and Dumbledore resolved them in the way he usually resolved such problems, by deciding that the alternative was worse. The magic took differently than the texts described. Instead of a clean binding, it produced something looser, more organic, not a fusion of cores but an entanglement. Two signatures wrapping around each other in the way of roots that have grown in the same direction for long enough that they can no longer be entirely separated. The scar's secondary resonance quietened, not fully, but enough. Dumbledore placed Ron Weasley in the second bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive. Beside Harry Potter's crib, he told Petunia Dursley she would be caring for 2 children instead of 1, that the same protections applied to both, that he was sorry for the additional burden. Petunia said nothing. She looked at the red-haired infant for a long time, then went downstairs and made tea and did not speak to anyone until morning. The cold that January was the variety that made the heating at number 4 inadequate. Vernon had turned the radiator in the second bedroom to its lowest setting. The room contained 2 children who were not his children, and heating them represented an expense he resented, in the specific way he resented all expenses connected to decisions he hadn't made himself. At 2 in the morning on a Wednesday, Vernon woke to the awareness that something in the house was wrong. He lay still, assessing. The temperature was fine, warmer than it should have been, given the overnight setting. The noise from upstairs was absent. He got up. He went to the second bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. The room was warm. Not the aggressive warmth of a malfunctioning heater, a different quality, steady and sourceless, filling the space the way warmth fills a room where a fire has been burning long in a grate on the far wall. Except there was no grate and no fire. The 2 boys were asleep. The red-haired one's hand was extended through the crib bars toward the dark-haired one's crib. The dark-haired one's hand was near the edge of his mattress, reaching in the same direction. They were not touching. They were arranged in the unconscious geometry of shared presence. The warmth was coming from the space between them. Vernon stood in the doorway for a long time. He could not explain it. He reached for the light switch. The porch light downstairs, a different floor, a different circuit entirely, made a short, sharp fizzle and then darkness from the street-facing window, where its glow should have been. His hand was still on the switch. He had not moved it. He took it off. He went back to bed. When he checked the porch light in the morning, the bulb was intact, filament unbroken, simply inactive. He replaced it anyway and did not mention it to Petunia. The warmth in the second bedroom was there the following night, and the night after, and every night that winter. He stopped checking. He adjusted the radiator upward by 1 increment, not because he had decided to, but because the alternative was continuing to notice something he had no framework for. And Vernon Dursley's relationship with things he had no framework for was to stop looking at them until they became furniture. The communication between them didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, the way language comes, first as sensation, then impression, then something that could almost be called meaning. By the time the boys could walk, they had established, without discussing it and without understanding what they were doing, a system that occupied no sound at all. Harry would feel something pulling his attention left or right, or toward the door, and the pull would be Ron, and it would mean something specific, not words, but here, or wait, or wrong, in the register of a child who had learned that noise produced consequences and had found an alternative to noise. Ron received Harry's signals as a change in pressure, a quality in the air between them that shifted when Harry's attention shifted, and he learned to read the shift the way you learn to read weather. By 4, the impressions had edges. By 5, the edges had context. By 6, they were conducting full silent conversations across a room with the fluency of people who had been speaking the same language their whole lives. Because they had. There were things the tether could carry and things it could not. It could carry direction and urgency and the specific emotional weather of a person going about their day. It could carry warning, a sharpening of attention that meant pay attention now, not in a moment. It could carry, by the time they were old enough for complex feeling, something close to comfort, the specific quality of warmth that meant I know or I'm here without requiring language for either. What it could not carry was secrecy. If one of them was frightened, the other knew. If one of them was angry, the other felt the static of it, before he could name the source. This was occasionally inconvenient. More often it was the thing that made everything else survivable. They did not tell Petunia. They did not tell Vernon. They did not tell Dudley, who would not have understood and would have found a way to make it ugly. They told each other everything. The chores divided by unspoken agreement, when they were old enough to have them. Harry took the garden because plants responded to him, growing slightly faster in the beds he tended, producing more reliably than the soil accounted for. Ron took the kitchen where possible, not because he was better at cooking, but because he was better at reading Vernon, tracking a mood from the sound of a step on the stair, and adjusting the household's invisible atmosphere before the mood could produce a consequence. He had never been told to do this. He simply did it, the way you do things that are built into the structure of how you think. Harry, for his part, found the gaps and rules, the spaces where a stated prohibition didn't quite cover what he wanted to do, and moved through them with the casual fluency of someone who had never believed the rules were meant specifically for him. Ron found this simultaneously useful and alarming, which was approximately the correct response. Together, they made the Dursley household manageable in a way that neither of them could have managed alone. This was not a strategy they had developed. It was a fact they had discovered incrementally, over years, through the specific empiricism of children who have learned that the environment they live in is neither safe nor stable, and who have therefore become very good at reading it. The reading happened constantly, below the level of what would look like attention, and the tether carried the readout between them, so that what one noticed the other could act on, and they moved through the house and its moods and its seasonal resentments, with a fluency that looked from the outside like obedience, and was, from the inside, something considerably more calculated than that. Dudley's gang was called the Smeltings Junior Crew by no one except themselves. There were 4 of them: Dudley, Piers Polkiss, Dennis, and Malcolm. They operated in the neighborhood with the confidence of children who had never encountered resistance that wasn't eventually worn down by persistence and 4-against-1 odds. The boys had been their preferred target since they were old enough to be interesting. The problem the crew had not yet identified: a preferred target who cannot be separately cornered is not a target. On a Thursday afternoon in September, the crew found the boys at the far end of Magnolia Crescent and arranged themselves in the standard formation, Dudley and Dennis at the front, Piers and Malcolm flanking, blocking the turn back toward Privet Drive. The formation was designed to make retreat the obvious option and impossible at the same time. It had worked before. Harry looked at Ron. Ron was already looking at Malcolm. Nothing visible happened. Malcolm shifted his weight. He had become, in the preceding 30 seconds, aware of something he couldn't identify, a quality in the air around Dudley that was slightly wrong, a sense that the pavement under Dudley's feet was not entirely the pavement Malcolm was standing on. He had no vocabulary for this. He had the animal instinct for it, and that was sufficient. He took a step back. Piers noticed and made the assessment that Malcolm knew something Piers didn't. His awareness moved to Dudley, who was still talking with the expansive confidence of someone who had not yet discovered that the room had gone quiet. Dennis made a small sound, the kind that precedes a decision to be elsewhere. "Where are you?" Dudley began. But they were already going. Malcolm, then Piers, then Dennis, backing away with the uncoordinated urgency of 3 children who had each independently decided that something about this afternoon was wrong. They scattered in 3 directions and were gone. Dudley turned back. Neither boy had moved. Neither had done anything visible. Dudley looked at the empty places where his gang had been. His face went through several configurations and settled on something worse than anger. The expression of a child who has had his confidence removed in front of an audience that no longer exists, but whose absence is evidence of something he cannot name, and who is therefore afraid without being able to say of what. He left. Not quickly. He made it look like choice. But he left. Malcolm went first, Ron said, walking home through the long route. "He always does when he's not sure what he's afraid of," Harry said. "We should remember that." Already did. That night, Ron lay in the dark and worked through the afternoon with the focused attention of someone building a file rather than reviewing a memory. The crew would reconstitute. The fear produced by something unnamed was temporary. Once they convinced themselves that nothing had actually happened, the fear would become retroactively embarrassing, and embarrassment would convert to aggression. He thought about Malcolm, about the step backward, about the variable that had shifted before Malcolm had conscious access to it. The most durable version of that afternoon was not one where the crew scattered. It was one where they couldn't find the boys to try. He began building the map, the crew's patterns, their routes, the neighborhood's geometry, who patrolled where which routes they used, how long the average patrol ran before they gave up and went home. By morning, he would have something usable. By the end of the week, Dudley's gang would stop being a variable that required management and would simply be a feature of the environment, like rain, worth accounting for, not worth fearing. This was what Ron did with problems. He made them smaller until they fit inside something manageable. The process was not dramatic. It looked like nothing from the outside, a boy lying in the dark, thinking. But by the time he was done, the problem was different. It occupied less space. It had edges where before it had only mass, and edges could be worked around. And working around things was something Ron had been doing since he was old enough to understand that the house he lived in was organized around resentment, and that resentment had predictable patterns if you watched it long enough. Harry, for his part, slept soundly. The resonance flare happened on a Tuesday morning. Harry felt it first, a pull in the tether that was different from Ron's ordinary signals, different from the background warmth that had been the constant of his life since before he had language for it. This was external. Something outside the bond had produced a vibration in it, the way a string produces sound when a nearby string is struck at the right frequency. He was pulling weeds in the back garden. He stopped and held his hand flat against the soil, feeling the direction of the pull. Ron, at the kitchen window, felt it through Harry's awareness. 2 seconds later, he set down the plate he was holding and looked east. They finished their tasks in the compressed, efficient way they had developed for situations that required being somewhere else by a specific time. And by mid-morning they were walking east along the pavements of Little Whinging, with the particular quality of two boys who appear to be going nowhere, and are in fact going somewhere very specific. The library was a 15-minute walk. They arrived in 12. The resonance was stronger inside, not overwhelming, but present in the way that a change in air pressure is present before weather arrives. Harry tracked it through the fiction section, past the reference shelves, to a reading table in the far corner of the children's section, where a girl with extraordinary brown hair was surrounded by a quantity of books that could not have been assembled without at least 3 trips to the shelves. She was 9 years old. She was cross-referencing 2 volumes simultaneously, making notes in a margin annotation system that appeared to have its own internal logic. Her expression was the expression of someone who has found a problem she finds genuinely interesting and is annoyed that the available sources are insufficiently rigorous. As they watched, she reached for a 3rd book without looking up, miscalculated the distance, and knocked it off the edge of the table. The book did not hit the floor. It stopped approximately 6 inches from the carpet, hung there for a fraction of a second, then settled down the remaining distance with a care that had nothing to do with gravity. She looked at it. She looked at her hand. She put the hand under the table and kept reading. Harry looked at Ron. Ron was already moving toward the table. She was researching what was wrong with her, which was not how she described it. She described it as investigating documented cases of psychokinetic phenomena in children, specifically spontaneous object displacement without apparent mechanical cause. She had 3 books open on the subject, 2 from the psychology section, and 1 a Muggle text on anomalous cognition that she had found through a footnote in something else. The psychological literature is inadequate, she said, without looking up. Not rudeness. The mode of someone who has been working alone long enough that the presence of other people has not yet fully registered as a social event requiring response. It keeps pathologizing the phenomenon when the phenomenon might simply not fit the current model. What phenomenon? Ron said. She looked up. Her eyes moved between them with the rapid calibrating quality of someone running an assessment. Not hostile, but thorough. She looked at Harry, then Ron, then the space between them, which held her attention longer than either of them individually. You responded to the same question at the same time, she said. I only asked one of you. He asked, Harry said. You both leaned forward before he spoke. The lean was simultaneous. A pause. We do that, Ron said. Why? We're not sure, Harry said, which was accurate. She looked at the space between them again, adding data to a file rather than encountering something new. Then she said, I've been moving things without touching them since I was 6. Books, mostly. Once a window. My parents think I'm imagining it. My teachers think something is wrong with me. The psychological literature agrees with my teachers, which suggests the psychological literature has insufficient data. She picked up her pen. What are you? We think we're magical, Ron said. We haven't verified it officially. What does officially mean in this context? There's a school, Harry said. In Scotland, we'll get letters when we're 11. She wrote something in her notebook. What kind of school? For magic, Ron said. Boarding? Yes. Is there a library? Harry thought. probably a very large one. She closed one book and opened her notebook to a clean page. "My name is Hermione Granger," she said. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything you know." They were there for 4 hours. Hermione was a different kind of listener. Most people listened to respond. Hermione listened to build, constructing something as they spoke, each follow-up question addressing the structural gap rather than the most immediately interesting detail. She asked about the warmth in the bedroom. She asked about the tether, not using that word, but describing the phenomenon accurately enough that both boys understood what she was describing. She asked about Dudley's gang, and Ron walked her through it in more detail than he had discussed with Harry, because Hermione's questions created space that Harry's silence usually didn't. When Ron described Malcolm's step backward, she stopped writing. "You identified the weakest structural point in the group's formation and applied pressure through a mechanism that didn't register as an attack," she said. "I suppose," Ron said, "that's a very specific kind of tactical thinking. Where did you learn it?" "I didn't. I just thought it." She wrote something. Harry, watching her work, recognized the quality of her attention, the same focused, unsentimental engagement he felt from Ron when Ron was working through a problem. Ron's version moved through situations. Hermione's moved through information. Between them, he thought, they probably covered most of the available territory. He stored it. At one point, Hermione looked up and asked, "The warmth in the bedroom, does it have a direction?" Ron and Harry looked at each other. "Between us," Harry said, "it's always between us." She wrote this down with the careful notation of someone who has just received a data point that changes the structure of the file. "That's not ambient magic," she said. "Ambient magic disperses. Something that stays localized and sourced between 2 points that's a sustained working. Something was made between you." She looked at the space between them again. Something that's still active. Neither of them had a response to this. Not because it was wrong, because it was exactly right and they had been living inside it for so long that the rightness of the description felt like hearing a word for a color you had always been able to see. A librarian offered them a larger table. They moved. Hermione reorganized her materials with the efficiency of someone whose system was fully portable and was working again within 4 minutes. Ron brought over the 2 books she hadn't used yet without being asked, because he had been watching her reference sequence and could see where she was in it. She received them without looking up. Not rudeness. The acknowledgement of someone who registers helpfulness as a fact about the person offering it, and incorporates that fact without requiring formal recognition. Ron had the expression he got when he was adding something to his map, deciding something about her, not whether he liked her, whether she could be trusted, which was the more important question. He decided quickly. Harry felt the settled attention arrive through the tether. At the end of the afternoon, Hermione closed her notebook. "I've been doing this wrong," she said. "The psychology literature starts with the assumption that something is wrong with me. I should be starting with the phenomenon and building the frame around it." "That's what you've been doing for the last 2 hours," Harry said. "I know. I'm telling you because saying it out loud makes it more durable." She looked at both of them. "I want to keep researching this. Together. I'm at this library every Tuesday and Thursday. 12 minutes. Ron said. 11, Harry said. She wrote their address, the time they arrived, the time she expected to be there next Thursday. She wrote cross-reference, tether mechanics, accidental magic triggering conditions, possible institutional frameworks. Then she looked up. "I should probably also know your names." They had been there for 4 hours and had not introduced themselves, because introduction had not been what the afternoon required, and none of them had felt its absence until this moment. Harry told her. Ron told her. She wrote both names. She looked at Harry's for a moment, the look of someone encountering a word in a context that produces an association she is not yet ready to articulate, then looked up. "Is there something particular about the name Potter?" "There might be," Harry said. "We'll tell you Thursday." Outside afterward, Ron said, "In the Tether's register, she's going to know more than us inside a year." Harry said, "She already does." "Yes, but she doesn't know what we know." "No, she doesn't." They walked home through the ordinary streets, and the Tuesday reformed around them as if nothing had changed, because from the outside nothing had, and from the inside everything had, and the distance between those two things was exactly where they had been living their entire lives. The letters arrived on a Saturday, 2 of them simultaneously, both addressed in green ink, both sealed with wax, both bearing the Hogwarts crest. Harry's read, Mr. H. Potter, the second bedroom, 4 Privet Drive. Ron's read, Mr. R. Weasley, the second bedroom, 4 Privet Drive. The address Ron had called home for 9 years, and which still occasionally surprised him with its specificity. Vernon intercepted both at the door. He held them for approximately 4 seconds, the 4 seconds of a man calculating his options, and then handed them over without a word. Years of living with the particular quality of the boy's combined silence had produced in Vernon Dursley a functional if unexamined policy. There were things he chose not to start, and this was one of them. Hermione, who had been expecting this since the first Thursday in the library, and had spent the subsequent years cross-referencing everything she could find about magical education, had a notebook open before Harry finished the second paragraph. The supply list is standardized, she said. Standard supplier, standard location. Diagon Alley, Ron said. We've known about it since we were 9. I've known about it since I was 9, Hermione said. You've known about it since you were born. Those are different things. She was already writing a shopping list considerably more organized than the one the letter provided. Gringotts was old in a way photographs hadn't communicated. Not physically old, but old in the way of something that has been doing the same thing for a very long time, and has stopped being impressed by itself. The goblins moved through the marble hall with the precise indifference of people whose relationship with urgency had been settled centuries ago, and found wanting. Harry felt the building's magic as he crossed the threshold, layered and dense, and fundamentally uninterested in him, which was the specific quality of institutional magic designed to process rather than to welcome. The tether registered it as a background hum, steady and impersonal, and Harry noted it the way he noted all impersonal things, with attention but without investment. The teller who processed Harry's vault access looked at the name, consulted his ledger, and then produced a second ledger, visibly older, the cover a different material, the spine worn at the edges, in the way of things handled regularly for a very long time. He consulted it for 90 seconds. The standard inheritance audit is triggered for all Potter account access after extended dormancy, he said. The audit has flagged an additional account for review. The Peveril secondary holdings in abeyance since the early 19th century? What does in abeyance mean? Ron said. Unclaimed. The account has been accumulating compound interest since then, and no qualified heir has presented themselves to claim it. Compound interest? Since the early 19th century? Ron said. Yes, that's a significant sum, the teller said, in the tone of a goblin for whom all sums were significant, and none particularly surprising. The Privet audit took longer. A different teller, older, shorter, with the bearing of someone for whom most surprises had already tried and failed. He produced a third ledger with a maroon spine. Privet family vault and seat, he said. Dormant since the deaths of Fabian and Gideon Privet. No surviving Privet line heirs. The female line claimant and her husband both died in the weeks following the fire at the family home. He looked at Ron over the ledger. Under goblin-administered succession law, the account passes to the nearest surviving Privet line descendant. You qualify. And there's a seat? Hermione said. She had been quiet for the entirety of the Gringotts' visit, building a model, and the model was not yet complete enough to usefully interrupt. The Privet family held a minor representative seat in the Wiesengamot, predating the current ministry structure. The seat passed into dormancy concurrent with the vault. He looked at Ron. You would need to be of age to exercise it formally. You are not. But the claim is on record as of now, Hermione said. It will be, yes, the teller said. She wrote something. They were finishing the paperwork when the teller added, in the same brisk tone he had used for everything else, one additional note on the Privet holdings. There have been ongoing attempts to purchase several Privet estate assets, property holdings in the Welsh borders, and a collection of registered magical items in storage at a third-party facility. The acquiring party is registered through 3 layers of holding company, but Goblin financial disclosure requirements make the beneficial owner identifiable. A Lucius Malfoy of Wiltshire. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. How long? Hermione said. The first purchase attempt was logged in the mid-80s. The most recent was 6 weeks ago. All 11 purchase attempts are retroactively void as of today. The assets revert to the Privet estate, now under your administration. He produced a receipt, slid it across the counter, and moved to his next task with the complete indifference of someone for whom 11 voided Malfoy purchases represented a routine morning rather than a satisfying conclusion. Ron picked up the receipt. He looked at it for a moment, folded it carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket. 11 attempts, he said. He was assuming no error would surface, Hermione said. The most concise available summary. They walked out into the brightness of Diagon Alley. Ron moved through it with the quality of someone still incorporating new information. Not the vault. Numbers were real but abstract. The 11 purchase attempts. The assumption of absence they represented. The specific quality of someone deciding year after year that the thing they were trying to acquire was uncontested. He thought about Malcolm on Magnolia Crescent, about the step backward, about the variable that shifts when the assumption of easy ground turns out to be wrong. Lucius Malfoy had made 11 attempts on the assumption that no heir would surface. The heir had surfaced on a Tuesday in August, 3 months early, with a receipt in his jacket pocket and no particular interest in making it easy. Platform 9 3/4 had a different quality of noise than the Muggle station, textured rather than just loud. Owls, the metallic percussion of trunks on trolleys, families conducting 6 conversations simultaneously in the compressed time before a departure that wouldn't happen again for months. Hermione was already through the barrier when they arrived. She was visible through the engine's steam, hand on her trunk and notebook open, writing something that couldn't wait. "I've been watching the sorting patterns from available data," she said when they reached her, cross-referencing family names against known house affiliations in Hogwarts, a history to construct a partial model. "My projection." "Gryffindor?" Ron said. "Probably, though the hat is described as responsive to individual character rather than—" "Gryffindor," Harry said. She looked at both of them. She closed the notebook. "Probably Gryffindor," she said. They found a compartment near the train's center. Ron's choice. Not at the end where older students concentrated, not at the front where anxious first years clustered. The middle, where the social temperature was lowest and the likelihood of interruption manageable. Hermione opened a book. Harry watched the platform recede. Ron began, methodically, and without announcing it, to map the compartment's sight lines, which other compartments could see through the glass, how corridor traffic moved. Draco Malfoy arrived 40 minutes in. He had 2 large boys with him who served the same structural function as the boys on Magnolia Crescent, the implicit argument of mass. He looked at the compartment with the assessing expression of someone conducting reconnaissance, then addressed Harry specifically. "It's true, then they're saying Harry Potter's on this train." Harry looked at him. "Who's saying?" Ron said. Malfoy's eyes moved to Ron. They conducted a rapid assessment. Jacket new, good fit, no visible wear. Trunk overhead, also new. Something recalibrated behind his expression without visibly recalibrating anything. "Everyone," Malfoy said. He looked back at Harry. "You'll want to be careful about who you make friends with. Some families are more useful than others, and yours is one of the useful ones," Ron said. "The Malfoys are—" "Lost 11 property purchases," Ron said, "because they spent years assuming the Privet estate had no heir. My family, those were our properties. The purchases voided 3 weeks ago. You can ask your father about it." The compartment was quiet. Malfoy's face went through a rapid sequence. He recovered quickly. He had been trained to recover quickly, but not fast enough. 3 boys in the compartment behind them had been watching through the glass, and one of them laughed, a short, surprised sound, quickly suppressed. Malfoy left. He said something intended to be the last word, and wasn't, because Ron simply didn't respond, which was more effective than any counter. Then he left. Hermione looked up from her book. Was that necessary? He was establishing dominance through implication, Ron said. The only way to stop it before it becomes a pattern is to remove the ground it's standing on. You embarrassed him in front of witnesses. I stated a fact in front of witnesses. The embarrassment was his response to the fact. Hermione considered this and returned to her book, which was not disagreement. The sorting hat was older than it looked, old in the way of something that has been paying close attention for a very long time. When it was placed on Harry's head, it said, "Ah, the tether. I haven't encountered one of those in a very long time. Not precisely like this. An entanglement. 2 cores grown in the same direction. You are Gryffindor. This is not in serious doubt. The courage is structural, not performed, which is the meaningful kind." "Gryffindor," it announced, and then, in a voice that carried the full length of the hall, "Keep him close to the bond. Separating them would be inadvisable." The hall was briefly uncertain how to respond. The sorting hat did not typically offer advice. Ron's sorting lasted 4 seconds. Gryffindor, the hat announced. And then, the bond holds, and so does he. 2 sentences from the hat-in-one sorting was, the assembled hall seemed collectively to understand. Unusual. The Slytherin table was quiet in a way that suggested active processing. Draco Malfoy, sorted several names earlier, looked at the Gryffindor table with the expression of someone revising a model. Hermione's sorting took 41 seconds, long enough for the hall to shift from politely attentive to genuinely curious. When the hat finally announced Gryffindor, it did so without editorial comment, which was, in context, its own kind of statement. At dinner, a boy named Neville Longbottom sat across from them and immediately forgot which fork to use. Ron passed him the correct one without comment. "Thanks," Neville said. "I always get them confused." "The logic of which one to use makes sense once you know what order the courses come in," Ron said. Neville looked at the cutlery array with the new attention of someone who has just been told an apparently arbitrary system has an underlying logic. "I didn't know there was an order," he said. "There's always an order," Ron said. "You just have to find it." Hermione across the table heard this and added it to the notebook she had opened despite it being dinner. The dungeon smelled of old stone and decades of accumulated magical residue from potions work, a quality of air that was thicker than the rest of the castle's, more present, as if the room itself had opinions about what was done in it. They arrived early. Ron built schedules with buffer time as a structural principle, because buffer time was the difference between arriving composed and arriving reactive. Snape entered without announcement. He stood at the front of the room without speaking for long enough that the expectant quiet had to reconstruct itself on different terms. Then he spoke, and the speech established the subject and the terms of the relationship between the subject and the person teaching it. Harry listened with the quality of attention he brought to things worth processing. Ron listened with the quality he brought to things with a structure worth mapping. Neither produced any visible response. This was the first thing that unsettled Snape. He was accustomed to first years who performed intimidation or performed eagerness, both of which he had strategies for. 2 boys who simply listened, settled, unimpressed by the demonstration of authority, without needing to immediately establish their own relationship to it, were a different data set. His eyes moved to Harry specifically. They stayed. Then he asked the first question. Designed for Harry in the specific way questions are designed for someone you want to demonstrate doesn't know the answer. What a bezoar was, where it came from, what it did. Harry had read ahead, Hermione had read ahead, and they had discussed it at the library table until all 3 of them had a working understanding. He answered fully, correctly, and in the register of someone who finds the question genuinely interesting rather than threatening. Because he had spent the summer reading about bezoars, and he genuinely had found them interesting. Snape's expression didn't change. A second question, the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane. Harry answered it. A third. Harry answered the third, and added a piece of context the question hadn't technically required, but that was relevant to the underlying principle, something Hermione had flagged in one of her supplementary sources. The third answer produced a silence in the room that was different from the silence Snape had produced on entering. This one came from 20 students recalibrating. Snape looked at Harry for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he moved to the practical work. Harry and Ron worked in the silence they had maintained since they were 4 years old. Not complete silence. They spoke occasionally, the standard low communication of 2 people sharing a workspace. But beneath that, in the tether's register, the real coordination happened. Ron tracking the temperature, signaling when the heat needed adjusting, Harry managing the preparation sequence, passing adjusted measurements without speech. The result did not look like 2 people's work. It looked like 1 person's work, except that person would have needed 4 hands and the ability to monitor 2 separate process variables simultaneously, which was not a thing any 11-year-old could do alone. Snape noticed on his first pass through the classroom. He stopped at their table. He looked at the potion, color correct, consistency appropriate, the surface showing the specific quality of a reaction proceeding as it should, rather than approximately should. He looked at the workspace's organization, functional and specific to how 2 people who know each other well divide shared space. He said nothing. He moved on. At the end of class, he tested each potion with a glass rod, working through the room with the specific commentary of someone applying accuracy rather than cruelty, which in several cases produced the same effect. He reached their table. He dipped the rod, He held it up, correct shade, correct viscosity. The class watched. This was the beat they had been waiting for. The famous Snape correction of Harry Potter, the first-year arrival's inevitable public reduction. Snape looked at the potion. He set the rod down. Adequate, he said. The word landed with the weight of something technically neutral that was, in context, considerably more. Not praise. But not the correction the room had been anticipating either. The response available to someone who has found that expected criticism has no legitimate basis and has no intention of offering illegitimate criticism. He moved to the next table. He wanted to say something, Ron said, through the tether. Yes, Harry said. He didn't have grounds. No, that's better than winning the argument. He knows that. He'll think about it. They cleaned their workspace with the thoroughness of people who had been cleaning shared spaces since they were old enough to hold a cloth, and filed out with the other students into the corridor's noise. Behind them, in the dungeon's quiet, Snape stood at the front of the room before moving to his desk. He did not think about the potion specifically. He was too precise a thinker to stop at the obvious surface of it. He thought about the silence between them, the way it had the quality of a practiced thing, the way the workspace had been divided without visible negotiation, the way one of them had spoken and the other had adjusted something, twice, without being asked. He filed it under things he did not yet have sufficient data to categorize. He sat down and began marking the essays that were due, and applied himself to the task with the complete professional attention of someone who was not thinking about anything else. He was, in fact, thinking about something else. Hermione had known about the third-floor corridor since October, not what was in it, but that its restriction was structural rather than disciplinary. A structural restriction meant something was there that required the restriction to exist. She had been building the file since the first week of term, the Gringotts break-in on Harry's birthday, Vault 713. The three-headed dog glimpsed through the briefly opened door on the night they were out after curfew. The layered, intentional quality of the magic she felt passing the corridor's sealed entrance. Multicaster, deliberate, not decorative. By November she had a working theory. When Hagrid let slip the name Nicholas Flamel, overheard by Ron through the tether-adjacent quality of his attention in occupied spaces, she had a conclusion. The Philosopher's Stone, she said on a Sunday morning, her notebook open to the relevant page, and 3 supporting sources stacked beside it. Flamel created it. It produces the elixir of life. Dumbledore moved it here from Gringotts, because someone is trying to steal it. That someone has already attempted to access Gringotts, and is now attempting to access Hogwarts. Quirrell, Ron said. A pause. What makes you say that? Hermione said. I've been watching him since September. The way he moves through the castle is wrong. He checks his surroundings in a pattern that isn't anxiety. It's surveillance. He monitors the other professors rather than fearing them. He paused. He also avoids the third-floor corridor completely, which is what someone who knows exactly what's in there does when they haven't yet decided to go for it. Hermione wrote something that's consistent with my model. What do we do? Harry said. We don't go down the corridor, Hermione said. We are 11 years old, and the thing being protected is being protected by Albus Dumbledore. Our role is not to be heroes. Then what is our role? Ron said. To ensure the right people know what we know, and to be prepared for the possibility that the right people don't respond correctly. The letter to Dumbledore was 4 pages, drafted by Hermione, reviewed by Ron for structural logic, signed by all 3. It presented evidence, reasoning, and conclusion without requesting action. The kind of letter that makes refusing to engage with it an active choice rather than an oversight. Dumbledore responded in 48 hours, warm, appreciative, saying nothing specific. It thanked them for their diligence and suggested they focus on their studies. He's not going to tell us anything, Ron said. No, but he knows we know, Hermione said, which means if something goes wrong, he can't claim ignorance of the threat. He placed the stone here with a school full of children, Harry said. The protection he considers adequate is a series of puzzles. That's worth saying to him directly, Hermione said. It starts a record. Quirrell moved for the stone on a Thursday night. Harry felt it through the tether as a change in the castle's background. Not nameable, but something that made him sit up and hold still, feeling the direction of it. Ron was already awake. They woke Hermione, who had left clear instructions about exactly this scenario 3 months prior, and was dressed and thinking in under 4 minutes. We're not going after the stone, Hermione said. We're going to ensure that if this goes wrong, 3 people know what's happening and can get help. She had solved the logic puzzle in December and written the solution down. She had sent the message to McGonagall rather than Dumbledore, a decision made before they came through the trap door, because McGonagall's response would be faster and less shaped by whatever outcome Dumbledore had decided to manage toward. The devil's snare they cleared in 40 seconds, Harry producing wandlessly the warmth and brightness he had been developing since he was an infant, keeping a cold bedroom habitable. Ron navigated the chessboard in 4 minutes through one of 7 solutions he had been maintaining in parallel since December, not one piece lost. Hermione walked them through the potions puzzle, pointing at bottles, not touching them. They entered the final chamber. Quirrell was at the mirror, the expression of sustained effort meeting sustained resistance. He heard them and turned. His face held 2 expressions simultaneously: Quirrell's fear, and something behind the fear that was not afraid at all. "Trio," Quirrell said. "In the wrong register. Too precise, too aware." "Professor Quirrell," Hermione said, her voice steady in the specific way voices are steady when the person using them has decided steadiness is the correct choice and has implemented it. "We've sent a message to Professor McGonagall. She's coming." Ron moved sideways. Harry moved right. Not aggressive, rearranging the geometry of the room, changing the available exits. "You won't find what you're looking for in the mirror," Harry said. "Not for you." He looked at the mirror himself. He saw himself with Ron beside him, and the stone was in his pocket in the reflection. A small red stone, already there, already his to protect rather than claim. He reached into his actual pocket. His hand closed around something warm and solid. The thing behind Quirrell's face understood 2 seconds before Quirrell did. The air pressure in the room changed in the way of something that had been moving and had stopped. McGonagall arrived 9 minutes later. They were sitting on the floor. Quirrell was unconscious. The stone's extraction had broken whatever hold had been using him as an instrument. The stone was in Hermione's bag, wrapped in her spare robes, because she had produced the bag before Harry had decided what to do with the Philosopher's Stone he was now holding in the middle of a dungeon. "Miss Granger," McGonagall said in the voice of someone working very hard to keep several separate responses separated. "I received your message." "Thank you for coming quickly," Hermione said. "Explain," McGonagall said. The explanation took 12 minutes. When it was finished, McGonagall was standing with the specific stillness that contains a great deal of activity that has not yet found its outward form. "Why did you message me rather than the headmaster?" she said. "Because the headmaster placed the stone in the school," Hermione said, "and we weren't certain what outcome he was hoping for." McGonagall produced the expression of someone who has received an answer that is simultaneously impertinent and correct, and is determining which quality to respond to. She responded to neither. "Come with me," she said. In Dumbledore's office, warm after the dungeon's cold, he received them with warmth that was real, and also managed. He looked at the bag. "You retrieved the stone," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "You put it here with students. You designed the protections without telling students they existed, which meant we couldn't avoid them. We went through them tonight, because we had no choice." He held the headmaster's gaze. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I believed you were safe," Dumbledore said. "We weren't safe," Ron said. "We were uninformed. Those are different things." A silence. "You are right," Dumbledore said. He said it with the weight of someone who had not expected to say it, and was discovering that saying it was correct. "Entirely right, and I owe you a more complete explanation than I have given you." "Yes," Harry said. "You do." He did not say it unkindly. He said it as a fact that had been true for months, and was now being formally acknowledged. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. At Harry, who was 11 years old and had just walked through 6 magical obstacles and retrieved the Philosopher's Stone, and was sitting in the headmaster's office, asking to be told the truth with the patient, unhurried quality of someone who has been waiting for this specific conversation for a very long time, and is simply noting that it has arrived. Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted, toward honest assessment, toward perhaps the beginning of something more difficult and more necessary than management. "There is more," Dumbledore said, "that I should have told you." "We know," Harry said. "Start now." Ron noticed Ginny first. She had arrived at Hogwarts small and determined, raised by their great-aunt Muriel, with the specific character that forms in children who have been told repeatedly that they are a bother and have decided quietly and completely to refuse that as a definition. Ron had watched her since her sorting with the focused attention of someone who has a baseline and is comparing against it. By late October, the baseline was wrong. "Something is wrong with Ginny," he said through the tether one Thursday evening. Wrong how? She's losing time. You can see it in her face. The specific expression of someone who has been somewhere they don't remember being. I've watched her look at her own hands twice this week like they've done something she didn't authorize. "The diary," Harry said. Ron had been approaching the hypothesis from behavioral evidence. Harry had been approaching it from the magical evidence. The specific quality of resonance the tether occasionally caught from Ginny's direction. A cold undertone with no organic source. They had arrived at the same place from different directions, which was the confirmation that mattered. They told Hermione that evening. "It's a Horcrux," she said. She said it the way she said things she had spent significant time being certain about before saying them, with the flatness of a statement, rather than the inflection of a conclusion. She had been cross-referencing soul-anchoring magic for over a year, assembled from a pre-ministry text on soul binding found through a footnote on magical inheritance. 2 archaic volumes on tethered consciousness from the general restricted section, and her own deductions about the scar's secondary resonance, which Harry had described to her in exact detail at the library table when they were 9. None of the individual sources used the word Horcrux. That term had been removed from accessible scholarship. But together they described the phenomenon with enough specificity that when she finally found the word itself, in the marginalia of the oldest text, it felt less like a discovery than a confirmation. "A piece of Voldemort's soul, anchored to a physical object," she said. "The diary is the object. It's using Ginny as a mechanism, drawing on her to reconstitute, feeding her the impression of a relationship, gaining access to the school through her because it can't access it any other way. It's talking to her," Ron said. "It's performing talking to her. The distinction matters. It's not a relationship, it's a possession in progress. What do? Harry said. "We get the diary, and we destroy it before the possession completes." Getting the diary required Ginny's cooperation, and all 3 of them understood that distinction mattered. She had been the subject of months of magical manipulation she had not chosen, and did not understand. The correct approach was truth. Ron sat with her in an empty classroom, and told her what the diary was, what it was doing, and how far the possession had progressed. He told it the way he told difficult things, directly with the specific kindness of someone who knows that softening accurate information is not kindness, but its opposite. She cried. Then she asked him to take it. She handed it over with both hands and didn't look at it as she did. The behavior of someone giving away something that has had access to them in ways they aren't ready to examine directly. Ron took it carefully and put it in his bag. That evening, in the library after closing, Hermione destroyed it. Not by physical method. She had spent 3 weeks developing a runic dissolution pattern targeting the soul fragment specifically. The diary burned from the inside out, slowly and very cold, and at the moment of dissolution it produced a quality of presence in the room that registered on all 3 of them as something very old that had not expected to end. Then it was gone. Paper and leather and nothing else. The chamber was Harry's to solve. He had been a Parseltongue since before he had language for anything, and he had been thinking about the basilisk as a problem requiring a specific kind of solution, not killing it. The basilisk was 1,200 years old, and the last of its kind. Its existence in the chamber was the result of Salazar Slytherin's choices, not its own. Harry wanted to ask what it wanted. He decided to treat that as an available option. Ron's contribution was practical architecture, mirrors for eye contact protection, the route through the plumbing system that Hermione had mapped from the castle's original construction records. Hermione's contribution was the preparation and the fallback, a containment ward she had designed that would hold the basilisk in the chamber if the Parseltongue approach failed. She did not tell Harry about the fallback until they were at the entrance. "You weren't going to lead with the containment option," she said. "I know, but I needed it to exist." "Fair," Harry said. The chamber was vast and old, and had the quality of a space that had been waiting for something for a very long time, and had made its peace with the waiting. Harry spoke at the threshold, not a command, an announcement, in Parseltongue. "I am here. I am speaking the old language. I am asking for a conversation." The silence afterward had texture. Then, from the far end, movement. The basilisk was enormous in the way of things that had been growing for 12 centuries, not outpacing their context, but growing into it so completely that the context has reshaped itself around them. She moved with the patience of an animal for whom urgency was a temporary condition that time always resolved. She stopped 15 meters away. Harry told her what had been happening: the diary, the possession, the fragment directing her. He told her the diary was destroyed. He asked what she wanted. The question produced in her a stillness different from her ordinary stillness. "What I want," she said, "has not been asked before." "I am asking now," Harry said. What she wanted, expressed in the register of something that had been waiting long enough to know what waiting felt like from the inside, was not to be used, not to be a weapon deployed by someone else's intention, not to be the instrument of a plan made without her participation. "I want to be the guardian of this place, not a weapon, a guardian. The choice to be mine." "Yes," Harry said, "that can be what this is." He looked back at Ron and Hermione. Hermione's hand was near the containment ward's activation point. She had not used it. He told them what the basilisk wanted. "Magical creature guardianship agreements exist in wizarding law," Hermione said, after a moment. "An agreement would need to be witnessed and recorded." "Can you record it?" Harry said. She was already writing. The agreement took 20 minutes to draft, 3 minutes to ratify, Harry translating each provision for the basilisk's confirmation. She affirmed each one with the gravity of something making a commitment it intended to keep. When it was done, she withdrew to the far end of the chamber. Harry watched her go, not with the dramatic attention of someone who has done something heroic, but with the quieter attention of someone who has moved a problem from one category to another, and is making sure the new category actually fits. Lucius Malfoy arrived at Hogwarts expecting to participate in Dumbledore's removal. He had board members with him, and the confidence of a man who has arranged an outcome and is arriving to confirm it. Hermione was in the entrance hall. She was holding a folder. He began to produce the expression designed to make a 12-year-old muggle-born girl in a school corridor feel that her presence was conditional. "Mr. Malfoy," she said, "I have the diary's residual magical analysis here, conducted by Professor Snape. The analysis confirms the diary's provenance, specifically the magical signature of the original enchantment, which matches Lucius Malfoy of Wiltshire as the enchanter." She held the pages out. "The board will want to review this before voting on anything. I'd recommend leading with it rather than trying to manage it afterward." Malfoy looked at the pages. He looked at Hermione. He left without using the room he had booked. 3 of the board members, having read the analysis in the corridor, declined to participate in a proceeding whose organizer's involvement in the underlying crisis was documented in a potions professor's handwriting on ministry standard parchment. Hermione put the folder away. She went back to the library. Ron caught the first inconsistency in the coverage of Sirius Black's escape at the beginning of 3rd year. He had read the coverage with the quality of attention he brought to everything that presented itself as settled and complete. Settled and complete stories were the ones worth reading twice, because the settlement and completeness were either genuine or they were work. Someone had arranged the story to feel that way, and the arrangement always left traces. The timing was wrong. The official account said Sirius Black had been Voldemort's most trusted lieutenant, the one who had betrayed the Potters' location. The Potters had died on Halloween. Sirius had been imprisoned the following day. One day, no trial, not even a preliminary hearing. Ron brought this to Hermione the 2nd week of term, after Lupin's first defense class, when it was clear Lupin was not the standard inadequate yearly replacement. "One day between the Potters' deaths and the arrest," Ron said. "No trial. That's illegal," Hermione said, without hesitation. "Yes. Which means either someone knew it was illegal and did it anyway because the emergency justified it, or someone knew it was illegal and did it anyway because they wanted him in Azkaban without the inconvenience of a process that might find him innocent." "What's the difference?" Harry said. "The first version makes Sirius guilty," Ron said. "The second doesn't require him to be." The Pettigrew hypothesis took 3 weeks to build. Hermione researched unregistered animagi. Ron tracked behavioral anomalies in scabbers across the rat's implausibly long lifespan. 12 items, 12 years. Harry obtained the Marauder's map from Fred and George through a trade and found that the map occasionally showed, near Ron, the name Peter Pettigrew. The name appeared only when Scabbers was within range. The exposure was Hermione's design, because confrontations were narratives and narratives could be reframed. What they needed was a procedure, a supervised practical session on animagus detection charms, framed as advanced independent study, which Lupin agreed to with the air of a man who suspects he is agreeing to more than it appears. A letter to the Ministry's Animagus Registry confirming all registered animagi in the British Isles, notably absent Peter Pettigrew in any form. A specific arrangement of witnesses handled by Ron over the course of a week, and a room Hermione had warded against rapid departures, 2 hours before anyone else arrived. With Lupin and McGonagall present, 4 other students as witnesses, Ron holding Scabbers, they ran the animagus detection charm. Scabbers lit up in the deep amber glow of confirmed, suppressed animagus form. "I see," McGonagall said very quietly. Lupin had gone still. Ron put Scabbers down. The rat tried to run. The ward held. Lupin performed the forced reversion, correct procedure, making the record cleaner. And Peter Pettigrew arrived in the room in the way of a transformation held for 12 years being reversed against the holder's will. Gradually, then all at once, with a quality of wrongness that registered as sensation before it became visible. He was small and pale, and his eyes moved through the room the way of something that has survived by being overlooked and is not yet certain that option is gone. He saw Lupin, he saw McGonagall, he saw Ron. "I can explain," he said. "Yes," Hermione said. "You can. That's the point." The explanation was given under Veritaserum, administered by Snape in the presence of faculty witnesses, per the protocol in the procedure document Hermione had given McGonagall before the session began. Pettigrew confirmed everything. He confirmed he had been the secret keeper. He confirmed he had given the Potter's location to Voldemort willingly. He confirmed he had killed the 12 Muggles himself, severed his own finger in the moment before his staged death. He confirmed that Sirius Black had not been party to any of it, had not known, had been trying to find Pettigrew when arrested, had spent 12 years in Azkaban for a betrayal that was Pettigrew's and a crime scene Pettigrew had manufactured. Snape was present for the entire testimony. He had stayed because McGonagall had not dismissed him, and because he was watching a 12-year narrative about a man he had hated with absolute consistency being methodically dismantled by accurate evidence. The dismantling produced in him a quality of stillness that was not agreement, and not denial, and not yet anything he had a name for. When Pettigrew was taken by the 2 Aurors who had been en route before anyone outside the core group knew what they would find, Snape remained in the room. "Severus," McGonagall said, "is there something you want to say?" A silence. "The testimony is conclusive," Snape said. "Yes, Black should be released." "Yes," she said. He looked at the table where Pettigrew had been sitting, the space this man had occupied for 12 years as a rat in a child's pocket, while Sirius Black sat in Azkaban for what Pettigrew had done. He left without another word, carrying something that had just significantly increased in weight. The Wizengamot emergency session produced the evidence and produced the vote. Sirius came out of the Ministry building into afternoon light, already going blue at the edges. He stood on the steps for a moment. He had been inside since the night of Halloween, 12 years ago in one form or another, and the outside was the outside in the specific way it is when you have been away from it long enough that its ordinariness has become remarkable. Harry was at the bottom of the steps. Sirius looked at him the way people look at things that are both exactly what they expected and entirely different. Harry had Lily's eyes and James's hair, and his own face, the face of someone raised in conditions neither parent had intended, who had become, despite this or through it, someone present and real. "You found him," Sirius said. "Ron found the inconsistency," Harry said. "Hermione built the procedure. I helped where I could." Sirius came down the steps and stopped in front of Harry. He did the arithmetic of 12 years in a single breath. "James," he said, "would have absolutely hated that you were more organized about this than he ever was about anything." "I know," Harry said. "Ron told me." Sirius laughed. It was a brief sound startled out of him rather than chosen, and it had the slightly rough quality of a laugh produced by someone who has not done it in a very long time and is discovering that the mechanism still works. He put his hand on Harry's shoulder. He did not say anything for a moment. "You look like him," Sirius said. "Around the hair, Lily around the eyes." "People say that," Harry said. "I know. I'm one of the people who will keep saying it." He looked at Harry steadily. He would have been proud. She would have been insufferably proud, the way Lily always was when she was right about something, and also when she was wrong about something, which was considerably less often. He paused. You were the project she would have wanted. Both of you. Sirius looked past him at Ron and Hermione standing at the bottom of the ministry steps in the afternoon cold. "That's a Weasley," he said. "Yes, your brother," Sirius said. "Not a question. Yes." Effectively. Sirius looked at Ron for a long moment. The quality of someone updating a very old map to include new territory that has been there all along, waiting to be found. Then, "Let's go somewhere warm." They went somewhere warm. The Privet seat's activation required Sirius as provisional holder until Ron reached legal majority, but Hermione had found, in the founding governance documents of the Wesengamot structure, a provision allowing the minor heir to specify operational constraints on the provisional holder. Every vote, every session, Sirius would consult Ron first. "You want me to hold the seat until Ron is of age," Sirius said, reading the form. "The seat is Ron's," Hermione said. "You'd be acting in his name, under his direction." "That's not how provisional seat holding typically works." "No, the mechanism allows for it. It's in the supplementary provisions." She indicated the relevant section. Sirius read it. "This would make me functionally a mechanism rather than a representative," he said. "Yes." He looked at Ron, who was sitting with the expression of someone who has arrived at a position he is comfortable with. "You understand what you're asking for," Sirius said to Ron. "Not a question." "The seat is a tool," Ron said. "Tools should be used by the people who know what they're trying to build." Sirius looked at both of them for a moment. Then he signed. The Goblet of Fire arrived at Hogwarts in October, and Harry felt it before he saw it. A quality in the castle's ambient magic that was old in a different way from the castle's own oldness. The goblet's age was distilled, a single purpose, held at concentration for centuries, producing a specific pressure in the magical environment that Harry had learned over 4 years of passive word sensing to identify as the signature of a working that was self-sustaining by design. He told Ron through the tether. Ron added it to the map he had been building since September. The structural abnormalities of the year. The unusual quality of the defense professor, who was performing normality in a way the genuine article didn't require. The specific absence of Bartemius Crouch Sr. from a ceremony he had been expected to attend. And the goblet, which was the most visible element, and therefore probably not the most important one. Hermione had the goblet's legal framework documented by the second week of November. "The binding is real," she said. "Canon-level magical contract. No withdrawal mechanism in the original charter. We're not entering," Harry said. "No, but I want to understand the binding in case it becomes relevant." It became relevant on Halloween. The Great Hall applauded Victor Crumb for Durmstrang, Fleur de la Cour for Beauxbatons, Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts. Then the goblet flared again. Harry felt the wrongness before the fourth name emerged. Not the clean burn of legitimate selection, but something with a different signature underneath. The way a voice sounds when saying something the speaker didn't intend. The name was Harry's. He did not stand. He sat very still and felt the room's attention arrive and did not perform any response. "Someone entered you," Ron said, through the tether. "Yes, someone who wanted me in the tournament. Someone who knew the goblet could be gamed and had access to it. Who benefits from Harry Potter competing in the Triwizard Tournament?" The question had the quality of something Ron was asking himself rather than Harry, because he was already working through the answer. They told Dumbledore that night, not the practiced version, this was compressed. Harry's name in the goblet required immediate engagement. "The binding is real. You will need to compete," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said. "That's not the problem. Someone engineered this, which means they're planning something that requires me in the tournament. We need to know what." "We've been identifying it since September," Ron said. "The defense professor, he's performing normality. The way he moves, the way he checks his surroundings, the way he monitors the tournament preparation without appearing to monitor it, it's surveillance. I have weeks of behavioral data." "What do you need from me to act on it?" Dumbledore said. "Veritaserum," Hermione said. "When we have confirmation, and authority to act without waiting for a procedure that might take too long." "You'll have both," Dumbledore said. The confirmation came from the tether 3 weeks later, a quality in the defense professor's magical signature that was wrong in the specific way of the diary, the same double register, the same cold undertone of a secondary presence using the primary as a vehicle. Harry told Ron immediately. Ron ran the behavioral analysis against the new variable, and the map resolved into one explanation. The person teaching defense was not the person his face belonged to. The confrontation was procedural, because Hermione insisted even under compressed timeline. Faculty as witnesses, veritaserum administered correctly. Confession on the record. Bartimius Crouch Jr., behind Moody's face, confirmed the polyjuice, confirmed the plan, confirmed the graveyard, in Little Hangleton, the ritual, the blood. The ritual requires Harry's blood and Harry's arrival, Hermione said. The portkey is the mechanism. Or we use the portkey, Ron said. Everyone looked at him. Voldemort is going to come back, he said, with the flatness of someone stating a structural fact. Disrupt this mechanism, he finds another one. We've been ahead of him at every stage, but we haven't addressed the source. You're suggesting we go to Little Hangleton, Harry said. I'm suggesting we go prepared, not dragged there by a portkey at the worst possible moment, with no backup. On our terms, at a time we choose, with Dumbledore knowing where we are, and the order in position. Hermione looked at the floor. Running probability. He's not wrong, she said. We have accumulated preparation that compounds every year we use it, and we need to address the Horcruxes. We've known what they are since second year, and we have a list. This is not a decision I would make for you, Dumbledore said. We know, Harry said. We're telling you what we're deciding. They went to Little Hangleton, 3 days before the final task. The order was positioned in the surrounding area. Not visible, not active, but there. Sirius had argued about the arrangement for 40 minutes, until Ron said, the graveyard has 6 entry points. Voldemort uses 3 as standard egress. Cover the other 3. That's where you're useful. Sirius stopped arguing. Wormtail was at the cauldron when they arrived, small in person in the way of people who have been making themselves small for 12 years, moving with the frightened focus of someone performing a task they are afraid to fail. He heard them and turned. Ron hit him with a binding hex before the turn was complete. Auror grade from the Privet Dueling Notebook's 3rd section. Precisely aimed at the moment Wormtail's center of gravity was committed to the turn, and before his wand had cleared his robes. Wormtail went down. Harry looked at the cauldron. The components were partially assembled, bone already, flesh prepared. Blood was the 3rd component. The ritual required his presence. He was here. But here knowing was different from here without warning. That was the variable that changed everything. Voldemort arrived. Not dramatically. He manifested the wraith form that had been existing for 13 years in the specific space between presence and absence, tethered to Wormtail and the ritual's promise. The promise of Harry's blood, specifically, for the quality of the protection it carried. The ritual requires my blood, Harry said, into the graveyard's specific quality of attention. You need me to give it, or to take it. Those are different things. The wraith had the absolute focus of something that has been focused on one thing for 13 years, and has no other orientation remaining. I'm not going to give it, Harry said. And taking it from 3 people who came here prepared is not the same as taking it from one dragged here by a portkey. Ron moved sideways. Harry moved right. Not aggressive, rearranging the geometry of the room, changing the available exits. The wraith's options: force the ritual through Wormtail, who was bound, manifest through another mechanism, or retreat. Retreat was not in its operational vocabulary. Dumbledore arrived at the eastern entrance. 11 minutes in, the order secured the other 5 entry points simultaneously. The wraith lasted 4 more minutes, not because 4 minutes resolved anything dramatically, but because 4 minutes was how long it took for complete containment to register, and for the assessment to produce the specific understanding that comes when the variable you didn't account for has already been accounted for by someone else. Harry watched the assessment happen. He could feel it through the tether's peripheral awareness, the subtle pressure change in the graveyard's magical atmosphere, the specific quality of something very powerful encountering a situation it had not constructed. This was the thing Voldemort had not planned for, not the order, not the containment, not even Dumbledore specifically. What he had not planned for was 3 children who had spent 4 years building exactly toward this moment, who had identified the variable, made the decision, prepared the ground, and arrived first. There was no improvisation in what they had done. There was only preparation meeting its occasion, which was the most disorienting thing a powerful opponent could encounter from people they had underestimated. The wraith dissolved. Not permanently. They all understood this. The soul fragment problem was documented. The Horcruxes were documented. This closed this year's attempt, and established the terms of the continuing problem. "He'll reconstitute," Ron said. "Yes, but not from this. We address the Horcruxes now." "Hermione's had the list since second year," Ron said. "I know," Harry said. "I know." The Horcrux hunt was not one confrontation, but a year of methodical, careful work. And the thing that made it methodical rather than desperate was the list. Hermione had been building the list since second year, when the diary had given her enough information about the mechanics to extrapolate the number and the type. She had refined it in third year after Dumbledore's partial disclosure, and again in fourth year after the graveyard. And by the time they sat down to begin in earnest, the list was not a set of guesses, but a structured argument, each Horcrux identified by category of object, probable location, and the reasoning behind both. The locket, located through cross-referenced family histories, and an interview with Kreacher that Ron conducted with the patience of someone who understood that productive conversations with difficult people required their dignity to be intact. Kreacher was old and bitter, and had been overlooked for so long that being genuinely listened to disarmed him more effectively than any spell could have. He told them where the locket was. He told them because Ron asked him as though his answer mattered, which was, as far as Kreacher could remember, the first time anyone had done so. The cup, through Dumbledore's memories and Hermione's deductions about the Lestrange vault, identified, extracted, destroyed through a modified version of the runic dissolution she had first developed in second year, and had been refining ever since. The diadem, through a specific quality of resonance Harry had been noticing since first year in the 7th floor corridor, and had never known how to name until he knew what he was looking for. The ringlast, destroyed through the same method, refined over 3 previous applications until the procedure was clean and fast, and produced no more of the cold wrongness that the first dissolution had generated. Each destruction was documented. Each was witnessed. Each was logged in Hermione's notebook, under date and method and outcome, because she had decided early on that if they were going to do this, they were going to do it in a way that could be verified after the fact. And Hermione's relationship with verification was the same in this as in everything else. Absolute. And then, in Dumbledore's office, the conversation Harry had been carrying since first year. "There is one more," Dumbledore said. Harry was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "You've known?" Since Hermione explained the soul-anchoring mechanics, since she explained what the tether was built on. He looked at the desk. "The scar. I'm the last one." Dumbledore's expression produced something that had the shape of grief and the texture of guilt. "I should have told you from the beginning," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "What happens now?" Dumbledore explained the nature of the final Horcrux's destruction, that it would require Harry to face Voldemort, to allow the piece of Voldemort's soul inside him to be struck. Not to die. Not exactly, but to allow the fragment to be hit by the same force that had created it, which would unmoor it from the life it had been using as a vessel. "The tether," Ron said, from the chair beside Harry. He had been listening with the quality he brought to things that required the full map before the response. "If the fragment inside Harry is struck while the tether is active, what happens to the field?" Dumbledore had not considered this. "The tether functions as a second core woven into the same field as the scar," Hermione said. Her notebook was open. "If the fragment is struck, the destruction propagates through the field. The tether doesn't just stabilize the fragment, it defines the boundaries of the field. The fragment can't go anywhere the field doesn't reach." "Which means it can't go anywhere the tether doesn't exist," Ron said. "Which means it dies in the space between us," Harry said. He said it with the quality of someone completing a sentence they had been working toward for a long time. "In the forest, when Voldemort cast the killing curse, the fragment of his soul nested in Harry's scar had nowhere to go. The tether held the field. The field had no exit. The fragment dissolved. Harry came back. The final confrontation in the Great Hall was less than the years before it, and more at the same time. Less because Voldemort was diminished, more because diminished things that are cornered are still dangerous. It lasted 9 minutes. It ended with the rebounded force of a killing curse meeting a wizard who had for the first time in decades nothing left to anchor him to the living. Voldemort dissolved. Not dramatically. That was the thing Harry would remember most clearly afterward. Not the noise, not the spellfire, but the specific quality of the ending, a thing that had been present in the world in various forms since before he could form memories, simply ceasing. He stood in the aftermath and felt the absence where the scar's secondary resonance had been. The absence was clean. "Is it done?" Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. The tether was clearer than it had ever been. The fragment's removal had taken a quality of interference with it that Harry hadn't known was there until it wasn't. What remained was the original thing, the bond Dumbledore had made between two infants in a cold bedroom, stripped of everything added to it. Just the two of them, entangled, having chosen each other before they had the capacity to choose anything. The Wizengamot Reform Bill was introduced in January, the year after the war's end. Hermione had been building it since fifth year, from the foundational problem outward. The foundational problem, the Wizengamot's structure rewarded the people already inside it and had no mechanism for demonstrating that the structure was producing bad outcomes. She had been cataloging the bad outcomes since third year. The bill covered the mandatory procedural protections for accused persons that had existed in the founding governance charter for centuries and had been systematically bypassed during the war. The independence requirements for investigative bodies, the representation provisions last updated in the mid-20th century, and a provision she had titled, in her working notes, the Sirius Clause, a formal prohibition on imprisonment without trial, cited by article and section, leaving no procedural gap through which an emergency order could substitute for due process. Harry's contribution was the testimony. His account of number 4, Privet Drive, the second bedroom, the chores, the specific calculated minimums of a household managing its resentment, through material deprivation. Ron had read the third draft and said, "The third paragraph is performing. The fourth paragraph is real. Use the fourth paragraph." Harry had removed the third paragraph. Dumbledore read the testimony and wrote a supporting statement of his own, an acknowledgement of the decision he had made when he placed two infants in a cold bedroom and told himself it was for the best. He allowed Harry to submit it alongside the testimony. The bill had 4 co-sponsors: Harry through the Potter Holdings and his formal Wizengamot standing, Sirius through the Black seat, Ron through the Pruitt seat, and Neville Longbottom, whose grandmother had read the bill in a single afternoon and owled her endorsement before dark. Augusta Longbottom had attended Wizengamot sessions for decades. Her endorsement, attached to legislation written in part by the boy who had survived what her son and daughter-in-law had not, carried a weight that no amount of careful legal argument could have produced. The debate ran across 3 sessions. Every member of the Wizengamot had received the bill with a summary document, 2 pages, plain language, each provision cross-referenced with the specific documented instance that had made the failure it addressed visible. Hermione had written the summary in October. She had revised it 4 times. The final version had no word that was there for rhetorical effect. Every word was there because it was accurate and necessary. Sirius raised the objection that stopped the opposition's primary argument in the first week, citing a provision in the school's founding governance documents that a recently attempted ministerial mandate over educational standards had conflicted with existing charter limitations on ministerial powers. The opposition had not read the primary document. Sirius had, because Ron had found the provision 2 months earlier, and they had been waiting for someone to make exactly that argument. Ministerial authority over educational matters is derived from the school's founding structure, not independent of it, Sirius said, when the opposition cited ministerial precedent. Expanding beyond what the structure authorizes requires an amendment this body has not voted on. The session's legal advisor confirmed what Sirius had said. The argument was not made again. Hermione argued the legal framework from the gallery, not the floor, because she did not hold a seat, because she was Muggle-born and the reform they were building had not yet been passed. She answered legal questions with the precision of someone who had read every primary document and written the bill's provisions herself. When a member cited a precedent she found inaccurate, she corrected it. Once, citing a case from the previous century, she was told she was misremembering the ruling. She produced the ruling. She had brought it with her because she had anticipated the citation. She had been anticipating citations since third year. The Sirius Clause was the hardest vote. Not legally, it was the cleanest provision in the bill, with the most direct basis in founding law and the most unambiguous precedent. It was hardest politically because it required the Wizengamot to formally acknowledge, in binding legal language, that what had happened to Sirius Black had been wrong. Not complicated. Not contextual. Not an emergency measure with understandable intentions. Wrong. Hermione had called this vote separately from the bill's other provisions. Let the opposition consolidate against one provision rather than spreading resistance across all 4. Accept the harder fight on the clause in exchange for cleaner passage on everything else. 28 to 21. The clause passed. Sirius, in the Black seat, received the outcome with the stillness of someone who has been waiting for something for 15 years. 4 seconds. Then he looked back at Ron in the observer gallery. Ron gave him one short, precise nod. The nod of someone confirming that a thing has been accomplished and can now be filed under completed rather than ongoing. The full bill was called to vote at the end of the third session. 31-17. The Muggle-born integration program opened its offices in March. Hermione had designed it, Harry funded it from the Peveril Holdings, Ron administered it, because administration was the role that required understanding how each individual case related to the structural whole, and adjusting the response when a case didn't fit the existing structure. And Ron had been doing this since he was 7 years old, with a mental map of a neighborhood's bully patterns. The program's function: a dedicated team to help Muggle-born students and families navigate wizarding institutions, Gringotts, the Hogwarts admission process, the ministry's registration requirements, and the specific practical knowledge that pureblood and half-blood families transmitted through family networks and that Muggle-born families had no access to, the knowledge that Hermione had spent years acquiring through independent research, and the specific exhaustion of having to find everything out for yourself, because no one had thought to tell you. The first case was a family in Bristol, a girl named Clara Osei, 9 years old, whose accidental magic had been presenting for 2 years, and whose parents had received the Hogwarts letter with the specific combination of terror and confusion that Hermione recognized because she had been watching it in her own parents' faces, since she was 9. Ron sat with the Osei family for 2 hours. He answered their questions directly. He explained the Gringotts process with the practical specificity of someone who has navigated it and knows which parts are frightening for no good reason, and which parts require actual attention. He explained the supply list without making them feel that not knowing it yet was a failure. He explained the school's culture, the houses, the social geography, the things that mattered and the things that were made to look like they mattered, with the honest, unpatronizing directness of someone who had been the person without context once and had specific memories of what that felt like. He brought them to Diagon Alley the following Saturday with the practical orientation that made the difference between a place that was legible and one that was not. Clara Osei walked through it with the wide-eyed, rapidly recalibrating attention of someone whose world has just significantly expanded and is discovering that the expansion is not frightening but is, in fact, interesting. At the end of the Saturday, she said, "Is it always like this?" "Like what?" Ron said, "This much to know." At first, Ron said, "Then you know it. Then it's just the world." She thought about this. "How long does it take?" "Depends," Ron said. "Do you have someone to ask?" She looked at him. "I do now," she said. He wrote the case file that evening. Under outcome: family-oriented, student-prepared, follow-up scheduled before term. Under notes: needs access to standard pre-Hogwarts reading list, arranged through program library. He sat with the case file for a moment before filing it. 9 years old. Accidental magic presenting for 2 years. Parents receiving the letter with terror and confusion. He had been writing case files for 3 months, and they still had this specific quality. Each one a person who had been living inside something they couldn't name, who had been told by the systems around them that they were wrong or strange or broken, who had arrived at the program's office and been told, "No, not broken, different. And here is what different means, and here is how to navigate it. And you are not the first, and you will not be the last. And there are people who have done this before you, and they are, on the whole, fine." He filed it. He opened the next case. By the end of the month, the program had 7 active cases. By June, 31. Hermione kept the numbers. She kept all the numbers. The cases, the outcomes, the gaps in the program's current coverage that needed addressing in the next iteration. She was already writing the next iteration. Harry found her at the program's office desk on a Tuesday evening, 2 notebooks open and already a third full. "How many cases this month?" he said. 47, she said without looking up. "That's more than last month." "Yes, it's going to keep being more than last month for a while." He sat across from her and looked at the notebooks, the files, the organized density of a workspace operating at full capacity that had already identified where additional capacity would be needed. "We need more staff," he said. "I know. I've been building the hiring criteria." She produced a document from the middle of the second notebook. "Ron's reviewing the operational requirements. We can post the positions next week." Harry read it. It was thorough, more thorough than the immediate need required, which meant it was exactly thorough enough for the need that would exist in 6 months. "It's good," he said. She returned to the notebook. Ron came through the door with 3 cups of tea, balanced with the efficiency of someone who has been carrying things in confined spaces since childhood. He set one in front of Hermione, who took it without looking up. He set one in front of Harry. He sat with the third and opened the operational file he had been reviewing. The office was quiet in the way of 3 people working in the same space, who have been working in the same space since they were 9 years old and no longer need to perform their ease with each other, because the ease is simply the condition. One of them checked something and marked it resolved. One of them added a case to the open file. One of them found the structural gap, the thing that would need addressing before the program expanded to the next stage, and wrote 3 lines in the margin of the working document that would, by the following morning, become the outline of a solution. They did not narrate any of this to each other. They didn't need to. The work continued in the specific quiet of people who have been thinking in the same direction for long enough that individual credit has become a category that no longer quite applies. The tether was very quiet at this hour. It wasn't that it was less present. It was that presence, when sustained long enough without interruption, becomes indistinguishable from the background of a life. Like warmth in a room where the source has been burning so steadily for so long that you no longer notice the warmth, only its absence when it's gone. Harry had stopped noticing the tether as a thing separate from himself somewhere around the age of 4. It was not that the noticing stopped, it was that it became the same thing as noticing his own breathing. Continuous, undemanding, there. Ron, across the room, did not look up. Harry, at the desk, did not say anything. They had not needed to say anything to each other about the particular quality of this evening, the way the work felt different from how it had felt in school, purposeful in a way that was directed outward rather than inward. The difference between solving a problem that exists and solving a problem that will exist if you do nothing. Both of them had been living with that distinction since they were 9 years old. Sitting across from a girl with extraordinary brown hair who was cross-referencing sources in a library and asking the right questions, and neither of them had ever quite stopped. Outside, the evening turned and cooled, the light going amber and then gone. Inside, the 3 cups of tea went cold at the same time. None of them noticed. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.